Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Parshas Mitzorah, but it's also a special Shabbos called Shabbos HaGadol, the Great Shabbos. And one of the reasons given by the commentaries why it's called Shabbos HaGadol is because originally at Pesach time, in the time when the Jews were leaving Egypt, they started preparing for the Paschal offering, and they were putting aside a sheep or a goat in preparation to bring the offering on the 14th day of Nisan. And the way it's understood is that the Egyptians, even though they knew they were preparing this for this offering, didn't stop them. Now the question is, okay, why not? There's nothing wrong with bringing an offering. Why would they necessarily have a problem with that? So many different possibilities could exist in answering this question. But one given by the Ibn Ezra is that the Jews were, in a sense, telling them that they were going to sacrifice a sheep or a goat, and the Egyptians held that the sheep and goat were like gods, and they weren't able to slaughter them, and they still let them do it, so therefore it's a miracle. And Ibn Ezra sort of gives an example of this. I believe he refers to, in a sense, in Indian culture, that they don't allow you to slaughter, for example, their cows. And therefore, he's saying the Egyptians had this idea that the sheep or goats were holy, and therefore you can't kill them. The problem with this explanation is that he's wrong historically. It's a good attempt at explaining it, but the truth is there's no such thing in Egyptian culture. So you have to ask yourselves again, why was this considered Shabbos HaGadol? How do you explain it this way? So another possible explanation is that really what was happening was that the Jews were preparing to offer a sheep or a goat because this is the season when the sheep and the goats would usually start bearing offspring. And as a result, this was like a holiday by nomadic peoples, people who were shepherds. Would the time of Pesach and time of Nisan, the spring, would be a time where they'd celebrate their nomadic lifestyle. And in a sense, what's really happening is there's a clash of cultures. The Egyptians were an agricultural society. They created a huge culture built around cities, and cities only developed as a result of agriculture. And you could understand that very simply even by the dreams that Pharaoh had that about the wheat. And they lived in the Nile Delta and around the Nile River, which was very fertile land, which was used for growing. And therefore, Egypt stood for agriculture and cities. Therefore, at the end of the book of Bereshis, it says when the brothers of Yosef came to Yosef's house and they had a meal, it says there that their meal they ate their meal separately from the Egyptians because the Roe Tzon, the shepherds, were toeva, were abomination in Egypt. In other words, the Egyptians looked down at shepherds, looked down at the nomadic lifestyle, and they felt they were a step above them and lived in an agricultural society and were building large empires built on cities which needed farming. And in a sense, what the Jews are doing is they were saying, we are still nomads. We want to celebrate our traditions and our history. Now the question is, why? The truth is, when the Jews finally enter the land of Israel, they conquer the cities, they build cities, they develop agriculture, and they no longer are leading a nomadic lifestyle. So that's not the ideal. Why would you want to celebrate this beautiful nomadic lifestyle when you're ready to give it up? And the truth is, an agricultural society is a step forward. So why is there this clash of cultures? The Abarbanel in the early 1500s gave an explanation. He said that all of the forefathers were Roe Tzon, were shepherds, and shepherds have more time on their hands because they're tending the flock in the fields, and they have time to think more about God and become great philosophers. It's interesting because the Abarbanel himself was a financier to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and he didn't live that life. He might have been idealizing a different type of lifestyle. But again, it's hard to accept his explanation because I don't know too many shepherds throughout history that became great philosophers besides the forefathers. Outside of that, we don't know of any shepherds who have become the great philosophers of our times. So, a better explanation, in my understanding, is that what we're really seeing is that we want to make sure that we stick to our traditions even when they don't have a real good reason. And maybe there even are not as advanced as the other culture, but we want to make sure that we stand apart. We want to make sure that we develop our own traditions, our own identity. And therefore sometimes it's important to stick to customs and traditions even when there's no real basis for this. I think very simply you can give a more modern example when you see Hasidim walking around with fur hats and long heavy coats, and they're doing that in Israel, which is a hot country. And where did they get that from? They're saying they want to wear Jewish garb, but we all know that it's not Jewish garb. This was the clothing of the more aristocratic element in Eastern Europe. They wear especially the fur hat, which is and was quite expensive. But what are the Hasidim really saying? They might be associating these clothing with some kind of mystical ideas, but in reality, what they're really saying is we want to be apart. Of course, we adopted this set of clothing from in Eastern Europe, and it had different reasons. But now that we have this tradition, now that we have this custom, we're going to stick to it. We're going to make sure that our identities are separate from the cultures around us. So sometimes more important than the philosophy, ideology, and maybe even morals and ethics are the fact that we're sticking to our traditions, that we're setting ourselves apart, that we're retaining our cultural identity. And perhaps that's what Shabbos HaGadol is all about, and really Pesach is all about. It's creating a national identity. And of course, we can't just have national identity without morals, without ethics, without principles, without ideas, without philosophical notions. All of that is extremely important. But we have to have something underneath it all which makes sure that we're able to stay apart. Good Shabbos.